Story 1. The patient in room 409 who wasn't on the roster. I worked as an overnight security officer at Mercy Hill Medical Center in Rapid City, South Dakota, a mid-sized hospital that always seemed to be just one emergency away from total chaos. The night shift was usually quiet between 2 and 4 a.m., the kind of eerie quiet where fluorescent lights hum louder than the patients. I had taken this job because I figured hospitals were safer than the drunk fights I used to break up outside bars. But in the 2 years I'd been assigned to Mercy Hill, I've seen things that made brawls in parking lots look comforting. This story happened last winter, during a blizzard so heavy it buried the parking lot cameras in ice. Only essential staff had made it into the building. I remember stepping into the 4th floor at 2:17 a.m., shaking snow off my jacket, thinking the night would be uneventful. The 4th floor was mostly post-op recovery and long-term patients, with a few empty rooms because of renovations. The air always smelled faintly of antiseptic and warmed plastic, like a toy store that also performed surgeries. When I scanned the digital patient roster posted on the tablet outside the nurse's station, I saw that only 6 of the rooms on the north wing were occupied. Room 409 was listed as vacant, lights off, beds stripped, no patient assigned. That mattered, because part of my job was to walk each wing and confirm there were no unauthorized visitors, especially on nights when staffing was low. With snow pounding the windows like fists, the hall felt tighter and darker than usual. The motion-activated lights flicked on ahead of me and off behind me, creating a tunnel effect that always felt like I was being swallowed. When I passed room 409, I noticed something off immediately. A sliver of yellow-white light leaking from the bottom of the door. I stopped. That room was supposed to be dark. I checked the handle. It wasn't locked. None of the post-op recovery rooms locked from the outside, but nurses typically kept rooms dark to preserve power and reduce patient confusion. The faint sound of someone breathing slowly, too slowly, seeped through the door. A rhythmic inhale, exhale, like someone asleep or sedated. I radioed the nurse on duty, Melissa, to confirm the room's status. She sounded exhausted, typing rapidly in the background, and told me, "No one is in 409. It's been empty since yesterday afternoon. If someone wandered in, they shouldn't be there." I pushed open the door, and immediately I felt a temperature drop, as if the snowstorm had crept inside. The room looked normal at first glance. A bed, a rolling tray table, a defibrillator monitor powered off, curtains half drawn. But lying on the bed was a man, pale, motionless, wearing a blue hospital gown. His eyes were closed, but I saw his chest rise and fall in that slow, mechanical breathing pattern, almost like it was timed. I stepped closer and noticed he was gaunt, his cheeks hollow like he hadn't eaten in days, and his hands were folded neatly over his stomach. He had an identification bracelet, slightly loose, as though it belonged to someone heavier. I leaned closer to read it. The name was smudged, but I caught the last name, Foster. My stomach twisted. Earlier that night, during shift briefing, it had been mentioned that a patient named Michael Foster had died in ICU around 9 p.m. Natural causes, cardiac arrest. His body had already been moved to the hospital morgue on the basement level. I stepped back and whispered into my radio, "Melissa, does the name Foster ring a bell?" She stopped typing. "Yeah, he passed away tonight." "Why?" I swallowed hard. "Because he's in 409. A long silence crackled through the radio before she answered. "No, "He's not. I helped transport him downstairs. What are you talking about?" I told her to come to the room, and while I waited, I studied the man again. Something was wrong with his breathing. No human breath is that evenly paced. It was like the inhale lasted 5 seconds, the exhale 5 seconds, never changing. Machines breathe that consistently, not people. Another detail hit me. The patient mattress wasn't dented under his weight. He looked like he was lying on it, but the surface didn't dip. When Melissa entered, she froze in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He was pale, yes, but not like this." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "He had a scar on his collarbone from a procedure years ago. Check if—" Before she could finish, the man's eyes snapped open. They didn't flutter awake. They snapped open like he had been consciously waiting. The breath stopped. The room went silent. I heard the storm outside hammering the windows, but somehow the sound felt distant. The man, Foster, tilted his head toward us slightly, without moving any other part of his body. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing most of the color. Melissa gasped, stepping backward, nearly tripping over the rolling tray. "Sir?" she whispered. He didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The monitors stayed dark. No machines were attached to him, yet his chest had been rising earlier. I took a step toward the bed, but the overhead light flickered violently, buzzing like an angry bee, and then the man sat up, not like someone waking from sleep, more like a puppet being pulled upright by strings. His spine didn't curve. He rose perfectly straight, shoulders stiff, chin lifting last. "He's not supposed to be here," Melissa whispered. "He's not supposed to be anywhere. He's dead." I instinctively reached for my radio, but static hissed through it, loud and sharp. The hospital lights in the hallway dimmed, one by one, as though something was moving past them toward us. The man opened his mouth slightly, and I expected a scream or a gasp, but instead, the room filled with a faint mechanical hum. It was coming from him, a steady, low-frequency vibration that made the glass in the light fixture rattle. Melissa clapped a hand over her mouth. I pulled her behind me, unsure what I was even defending her from. The man swung his legs off the bed, his feet hovering an inch above the floor before dropping. When he stood, he turned his head toward the doorway, not at us, but past us, like he was looking for someone else, or following something. And then, without warning, he walked forward, but his feet dragged, not lifting properly. The sound was wrong, not footsteps, but the scraping of skin on tile. "We need to go," Melissa whispered, but my legs refused to move as he passed within 2 feet of me. His skin was cold enough that I felt the temperature shift around him, like opening a freezer door. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge us. He simply walked out of the room and into the hallway, his arms limp at his sides. Melissa whispered, "He's heading toward ICU. Why?" I asked, though she didn't have an answer. We followed from a distance. The hallway lights brightened ahead of him and dimmed behind him, like the building itself reacted to his presence. The nurses' station screens glitched as he passed, showing flickers of static and distorted lines. When he reached the glass doors leading into ICU, they slid open on their own despite being locked at night. Inside ICU, the only nurse on duty, a guy named Alex, was charting something on his computer when he noticed the man enter. He started to say, "Sir, you can't be," but froze when he saw the face. "Isn't that he died tonight?" "We know," Melissa whispered. "We don't know what he's doing." The man walked to an empty ICU bed. Bed 12. The exact one he had died in hours earlier. He stopped at its foot, placed his hand on the metal railing, and slowly leaned forward until his forehead touched the sheet. A long, drawn-out exhale came from him, and then he went still. The overhead light above bed 12 flickered twice, and then he collapsed. This time, truly collapsed like a person with no strength left in their bones. He hit the floor hard, his limbs folding unnaturally. Melissa rushed forward, checking his pulse. "Nothing," she whispered. "He's cold, really cold." Security protocol demanded that we call hospital administration, so we did. But when admin arrived 20 minutes later, with badges and clipboards and the vague authority only administrators possess, the body was gone. Only a faint puddle of melted snow remained on the ICU floor. The security footage was pulled. All of it. Every camera from 4th floor to ICU. And this is the part that still keeps me up at night. The hallway cameras showed me opening the door to room 409. They showed Melissa walking up to me. But inside the room, the camera showed an empty bed. No patient. No movement. No figure sitting up. No man walking out. In the footage, Melissa and I were staring at nothing, talking to no one, then stepping back in fear from a bed that held only wrinkled sheets. In the ICU footage, bed 12's overhead light flickered, but the floor beneath it remained empty. Nobody entered. Nobody collapsed. Nobody disappeared. Administration told us to consider it a stress-induced misinterpretation of events. They claimed blizzard-related power fluctuations had caused glitches in both our perception and the equipment. But later that week, the morgue technician told me something quietly, off the record, while I was doing routine rounds. That body, Foster, his tag was logged, his paperwork processed. But he swallowed. When we went to move him for transfer the next morning, the drawer was empty. "Maybe he was moved?" I asked. "No," the tech said. He was never moved, and the sheet inside the drawer was warm. I still patrol the 4th floor sometimes, and every time I walk past room 409, I swear I smell cold air and a faint mechanical hum leaking from under the door just like that night. And the roster still lists the room as vacant, always vacant. But sometimes, when I pass it around 2 or 3 a.m. Story 2. The hallway that nurses refused to walk after midnight. The first time I realized something was deeply wrong with the Eastern ICU hallway of Street. Bridget Medical Center in Idaho Falls, it was just past 12:40 a.m., during a night shift that had otherwise been painfully quiet. Anyone who has ever worked nights in a hospital knows that the silence is never real. Monitors hum, vents push cold, recycled air, and distant footsteps echo like ghosts of people who aren't actually there. But that hallway, the one that connected the old ICU wing to the temporary storage rooms, had a kind of silence that felt intentional, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to step inside. I didn't believe any of the rumors then. The older nurses avoided talking about it directly, offering only half-joking warnings like, "Don't do rounds down that hall after midnight unless you want to hear things you can't explain." I thought it was just hazing for the new guy. So when my patient sheet said I needed to check the med fridge in that wing, I decided to go alone. The moment I stepped past the first overhead light, the temperature dropped sharply enough that I felt it behind my eyes. The fluorescent bulbs above me flickered not dramatically, just a faint, high-frequency flutter like the building was grinding its teeth. I kept walking, telling myself the cold was because that section hadn't been remodeled since the early 90 seconds. I was halfway down the hall when I heard it, the sound of a hospital bed being rolled somewhere ahead of me, slow and uneven, one wheel squeaking as if grit had gotten lodged inside the bearing. It echoed faintly, the way metal does when it vibrates against tile. I froze because I knew no beds were stored down here. We had locked all unused equipment in the old surgical wing after a break-in the month before. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" But my voice sounded wrong, flattened, like the hallway swallowed every bit of tone before it could bounce back. No reply, just that slow, rhythmic squeak. I took a few steps forward. The sound stopped immediately. That was the first time the air felt like it was watching me. I checked the med fridge as fast as I could and left without looking down the hall again. When I returned to the nurse station, Marlene, our charge nurse with almost 20 years of experience, looked at me and said, "You went down C Hall after midnight, didn't you?" She didn't say it like a question, more like a diagnosis. I asked what was wrong with it, but she only said, "Just don't go there alone after 12:30. And if you hear anything, don't talk back." She wouldn't explain further. For a while, nothing else happened. I convinced myself it was just the acoustics of an old building. But 2 weeks later, on another slow night, I was coming out of a patient room when I saw, out of the corner of my eye, a figure walk past the glass panel near the end of the ICU desk. Just a silhouette, a patient in a hospital gown, thin, slow-moving. The kind of thing you see all the time during nights when people can't sleep and wander around. But none of our patients fit that shape. And no discharge bracelets were missing. I followed the figure toward C Hall. When I stepped inside, something was off immediately. The overhead lights were all on, but everything felt dimmer, like the hall was lit through a layer of water. My footsteps sounded muffled, like I wasn't actually touching the floor. That cold feeling returned stronger this time, creeping across my scalp in a way I can still feel if I think about it too hard. And then I saw someone. At the very end of the hallway, near the old supply closet, a figure stood facing the corner. They didn't move, didn't sway, didn't breathe, just stood pressed toward the wall. I called again, "Sir, are you okay?" The figure didn't react. I walked closer, my heart punching harder with each step. 20 feet, 10 feet, 5. At that distance, I realized there was no hair, no skin texture, no folds in the gown, no detail at all. It was a silhouette with no person to cast it. Before I could process what I was seeing, the gurney sound started behind me again, louder this time, like someone was rolling it fast toward my back. I spun around, nothing. The hall behind me was empty. When I turned back, the silhouette in the corner was gone. I hurried out of the hallway and almost collided with Georgia, our most senior nurse. She grabbed my arm tightly and whispered, "Don't acknowledge it. Don't ever answer if it calls." When I asked what she meant, she only said, "You'll see. They always try to make you talk first." I didn't understand what she meant until months later when the worst incident happened, the one that finally made every nurse on staff refuse to walk that hallway after midnight, even if it meant breaking protocol. It began on a night that felt too calm. The air pressure was strange, like before a thunderstorm, except there was no weather outside, just a clear Idaho winter sky. I was finishing paperwork when I noticed movement on the security feed. The hallway camera for C-Wing flickered once, then cleared. A tall, thin figure stood perfectly still in the center of the hall. It wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, wasn't anything. I looked around to see if any of my coworkers were nearby. Kim was on her break. Marlene was charting. Georgia was restocking IV lines. None were in that hall. The figure on the screen didn't match anyone in the building. I leaned closer to the monitor. "Is he facing the camera?" I whispered. Georgia walked over, looked at the screen, and immediately stiffened. "Don't speak to it," she said, but I never got the chance. On the grainy feed, the figure painfully slowly tilted its head toward the camera until its face should have been visible. The moment its head aligned with the lens, the monitor snapped to black. And right behind my shoulder, a voice whispered, as clear as if a man were inches from my ear, "Nurse, can you help me find my room?" I didn't want to step back into room 304. Every instinct in my body screamed leave, and the air around the doorway felt heavier, colder, like someone had just opened a freezer behind me. But the monitor inside the room had flatlined, and protocol said I needed to confirm the patient's condition. And worse, Nurse Herrera, who'd been on the floor the longest, was standing behind me, whispering harshly, "Go on, Emily. She's gone. Just turn off the alarm." But I had just seen her, the woman in the bed. She had spoken to me, not normally, but in a rattling whisper from a body that wasn't even breathing. I stepped back inside. The fluorescent lights flickered once, buzzing the way they do when they're on their last days. Her body lay still on the bed, gray skin, eyes open, exactly as before. Except now, her left hand was pointing at me. It hadn't been like that before. Jesus, I stumbled back. Herrera didn't follow me into the room. She stayed at the entrance as though invisible lines kept her in place. "Just confirm it." I moved to the bedside slowly, every part of me shaking. The woman's lips were slightly parted now, like she had just finished saying something. I didn't want to look, but I forced myself. Her mouth wasn't just open, there was dried blood at the corners, almost black in the dim light. I pressed 2 fingers to her neck. No pulse. As I leaned closer, a soft, wet sound escaped her throat like a bubble popping in thick fluid. I jerked back. She made a sound." Herrera's voice came from behind me, trembling. "She does that." "What?" "She's been dead since sunrise, Emily. The body releases air sometimes. It's normal." That didn't feel normal. Not even close. I turned off the monitor, and the room instantly felt darker, like the soft glow of the heart rate line had been protecting me somehow. Without it, the silence was oppressive. When I stepped back into the hall, Herrera closed the door quickly, almost slamming it. "We shouldn't go in there at night," she muttered. I stared at her. "Why not?" She didn't answer. She walked away. 3 hours later, 3:17 a.m. I was in the med room when the overhead paging crackled on. Code blue. Room 304. Code blue. Room 304. I froze. That wasn't possible. Room 304 had been listed as post-mortem in the system. Dead patients don't get code blues. I ran to the nurse's station. Who triggered that? Was it a mistake? The charge nurse looked sick. It came from the bedside button. My stomach twisted. No one was in that room. No one living. Anyway. Herrera appeared from around the corner, pale as the walls. "Don't answer it." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "We have to go, if there's a code." "It's not a patient," she hissed through clenched teeth. The overhead alarm continued, the siren echoing through the empty corridor. I couldn't just ignore it. "I'm going." Herrera grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. "Don't open that door." "Then what do you expect me to do?" Before she could answer, the alarm abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Then, through the hallway, through the thin hospital walls, a slow knock came from inside room 304. 3 taps. Even. Rhythmic. Like someone politely waiting for permission to leave. Herrera stepped back, shaking her head violently. "No. Don't answer. Don't acknowledge it." Then the door handle of room 304 began to turn, metal clicking, slowly, deliberately. The door creaked open by an inch. Cold air drifted out, rolling over my shoes like fog from a freezer. I saw a pale, bony hand curl around the edge of the door from the inside, fingers long and stiff like they hadn't moved in years. The skin looked frostbitten, grayish blue and cracked. The hand pulled the door open wider, and then I saw her. Not fully, just her face peeking through the opening. The dead woman, her head tilted unnaturally sideways, her neck bent like a broken stick under the weight of her skull. Her eyes were rolled too far upward, showing mostly the whites, and her lips moved. The sound that came out was not human speech. It was a slow, dragging inhale, like she had been drowning and finally found air. "Ah!" Herrera screamed behind me. But I couldn't move. The woman lifted one trembling hand and pointed directly at me again, the same gesture she had made before she died. Except this time, she was standing. She leaned forward slightly, her bones cracking under her skin as she moved. Then she spoke, this time in words. "You opened my eyes." The hallway lights flickered violently. The air pressure changed, like the building was suddenly breathing in. She stepped forward. One foot dragged behind her as if broken. I found my voice just long enough to whisper, "What do you want from me?" Her mouth stretched open too wide, the skin around it tearing as she smiled. "Then, you saw me, and the lights went out." When the lights went out like that, the emergency backup should have kicked in instantly. In every hospital I've ever worked in, the hallways never fall into complete darkness, not even for a second. But that night, the entire East Wing stayed pitch black for at least 10 long seconds. 10 seconds where all I could hear was my own breathing and something else, a soft dragging sound, like bare feet moving slowly across linoleum. I froze, gripping the railing along the wall, feeling the cold metal under my hand. My eyes adjusted just enough to see the faint red glow of the exit sign at the far end. But something was blocking part of that glow, a shape, a person, thin, motionless, standing directly in the hallway between me and room 304. I whispered, "Hello, are you all right?" My voice sounded too loud in the darkness. The shape didn't move at first. Then, slowly, it tilted its head to the side, like it was studying me. The dragging sound started again, but this time it wasn't coming from the hall, it was coming from behind me. I spun around, but all I saw was darkness. The lights flickered once, twice, and then finally surged back on. The hallway was empty. No figure, no patient, nothing. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself I was overtired, that her chart, her vitals, her room being sealed earlier, all of it had just wound me up. I told myself stress could make anyone see things. But when I turned toward room 304, the door was cracked open. I had checked it earlier. I remembered that moment clearly. It had been shut tight. I walked toward it slowly. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave it alone. The air around the door felt colder than the rest of the hallway. Not just a little, I'm talking the kind of cold you feel in morgue freezers. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers. The room was dark except for the dim monitor light flickering near the bed. The smell inside hit me. First, antiseptic, mixed with something old, something stale, like damp clothing sealed away for years. The bed was empty. The restraints that had been listed in her incident notes were hanging loose, straps dangling over the edges. I stepped closer and noticed something on the sheets, shallow footprints, bare feet, small. They looked wet, as if the person had stepped in a puddle before climbing onto the mattress. but the floor was dry. "Ma'am," I said softly, forcing the words out, "you're not supposed to be out of bed." I don't know why I said it. Fear makes you cling to routine, and routine told me to treat her like any other patient. I moved toward the bathroom. The door was closed. Light was seeping from underneath it, but it flickered like candlelight. We didn't use candles in hospitals. Ever. I knocked lightly. "Ma'am? Are you inside?" No answer. I reached for the handle. My hand was shaking so badly I had to steady my wrist with my other hand. I turned the knob. It clicked softly. And then, before I could push the door open, a voice whispered my name directly behind me. I spun so fast, I stumbled into the opposite wall. My heart felt like it was going to tear out of my chest. But the room was empty, completely empty. I grabbed my radio and hit the call button, but all I got was static, not the usual kind either. This static had a rhythm to it, almost like faint breathing mixed in. I backed out of the room, leaving the bathroom door closed. Instinct told me that whatever was on the other side didn't want the door opened, and I didn't want it either. I stepped into the hallway, still gripping my radio, and that's when I saw her. The woman from the old picture in the file room. Same torn patient gown, same long black hair stuck to the sides of her face, same empty expression, eyes half open, staring through me. She was standing at the far end of the hall, about 30 feet away, swaying slightly. Her head tilted again, that unnatural motion I'd seen earlier, like she wasn't controlling her own body. I whispered, "Please, please stop." She took one slow step toward me. Her bare foot left a faint, wet print on the floor. Then another. I backed up until my shoulders hit the wall. The temperature around me dropped so quickly my breath turned white. She was halfway down the hallway now, and something in me snapped. I bolted. I ran so hard down that hall that I nearly slipped rounding the corner. When I reached the nurse's station, 2 other nurses looked up in shock. I pointed behind me, trying to get the words out, but all I could say was, 304, she's out of the room. They exchanged a look I'll never forget. Not fear, but pity. One of them, an older nurse named Julia, grabbed my arm gently and said, "Honey, 304 has been empty for years." "No," I said. "There's a patient. I saw her chart. She had restraints on her bed. Julia shook her head slowly. Room 304 was shut down after a suicide in 1998. They moved all records to storage. That room hasn't housed a patient since before you were even in high school." I tried to explain everything, but my words were tripping over each other. Julia walked with me back toward the east wing, her flashlight sweeping the floor. The hallway was empty. The door to room 304 was closed. And the footprints I'd seen, the small wet ones, were completely gone. Julia opened the room slowly. It was dark, dusty, and cold. The bed had no sheets, no restraints, no chart, nothing. "Sometimes," she whispered, "this place remembers things. That's why we tell the new staff not to go down this hallway unless they have to." I didn't sleep after my shift. I went home shaking, replaying every moment of that night. The next day, I checked the old storage files myself, and I found her. The woman from room 304. She had been admitted for severe post-traumatic hallucinations after a highway accident. She tried to escape her room multiple times. In her final incident report, the last line said, "Patient found deceased inside bathroom with door locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. The same bathroom I almost opened." That was 3 years ago. I still work at the same hospital, but I don't take night shifts anymore. I can walk past every hallway, every wing, except the east side. Because sometimes, when I'm heading home after sunset, I glance toward that corridor, And if the lights happen to flicker at the right moment, I still see her, standing in the dark, head tilted, waiting. Story 3. The Overnight Technician at Mercy Hill Medical Center. I worked as an overnight radiology technician at Mercy Hill Medical Center, a mid-sized hospital just outside Denver, Colorado. I'd been there almost 6 years, and during that time, I thought I had seen everything. Trauma cases that made no sense, victims who described impossible events, and patients who claimed to see people standing in the corners of their rooms. I always chalked it up to shock, medication, or sleep deprivation. Hospitals breed hallucinations the way forests breed shadows. But what happened on my last weekend shift wasn't a hallucination. And I know that because every symptom I've read about, every psychological explanation people tried to give me afterward doesn't line up with what I experienced. I want to explain it from the beginning, because the more I replay it in my head, the more I realize the pieces fit together in a way that terrifies me. The Friday night had been slow, only 3 imaging requests after 11 p.m., and 2 of them were routine CT scans for elderly fall patients. My coworker, another tech named Morgan, left at midnight. She was scheduled only until then, while I had to stay until 7 a.m. "You'll be fine," she joked as she grabbed her purse. "Nobody comes down here after midnight, except residents too tired to know what button they're pressing." She wasn't wrong. The radiology wing was isolated on the lower level, with long, windowless hallways, cold tile floors, and a constant hum from the MRI machine that you eventually stop hearing after enough nights. At 2:17 a.m., I got a call from the ER. The resident on the line sounded tired and rushed. "Hey, we need a CT head on a patient who just came in. Possible trauma. They're on their way down." I prepped the machine, but there was something odd in his voice, like he wasn't fully telling me everything. I didn't think much about it, though. Trauma cases at night were common. 10 minutes later, I heard the gurney wheels before I saw the patient. The orderly pushing him looked pale and uncomfortable, the kind of expression people get when they have to transport something they'd rather not look at. The patient was an older man, maybe late 60s, wearing a tattered shirt soaked in dried blood. His hair was gray and matted. His eyes were closed, and he wasn't restrained, but his hands were curled tightly at his sides, knuckles white. "What happened?" I asked. The orderly shrugged. "Found on the side of I-70. Crawled out of the ditch, apparently. Told EMS he needed a scan of his memories." I thought he was joking, but his tone was flat. "He said that?" "Verbatim. They left me alone with him, which wasn't unusual. Most patients slept or were sedated. I started hooking him up to the monitors, placing the leads gently on his chest. His skin felt ice cold, not cool like poor circulation or shock, but the kind of cold you feel on metal handrails in winter. "Sir?" I asked quietly. "Can you hear me?" His eyes shot open. Instantly. Wide. Staring directly at me. Not confused, not dazed, just staring. His voice was low and raspy. "They don't know I'm here." "Who?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "The people who followed me. They followed me for miles. They're still in the dark." I assumed he was delusional. Trauma, plus stress, often did that. "We're going to take some images of your head," I said, adjusting the table. "It'll help us figure out what's going on. You won't find it in my head." His eyes never left mine. "It's not in me. It's around me." That was enough to raise every hair on my arms. I tried to keep focused, aligning him with the machine, typing his information into the system. Though the ER hadn't sent much, no name, no ID, just male, approx. 65-70. Possible neurological episode. At 2:48 a.m., I moved to the control room and prepared to start the scan. Through the glass window, I could see him lying perfectly still. Too still. Most patients fidget or blink or shift their arms. He lay stiff like a corpse. When I hit begin, the machine hummed to life. The table moved slightly. The circular gantry lights glowed. Everything was normal until the monitor flickered. The imaging software glitched, showing static for a second, followed by a warped black and white frame. Then, another. The system had never done that before. On the third flicker, the display froze on an image that I can only describe as wrong. It showed the patient on the table, but not lying down. In the image, he was sitting upright, leaning toward the glass with his head twisted at an impossible angle, staring directly into the camera. I looked through the actual window. He was still lying flat, motionless. I checked the hardware. No errors. No power interruption. The lights hadn't flickered. Nothing should have caused that. But the image stayed frozen, as if mocking me. When it finally snapped back to normal, I noticed movement inside the CT room. Very slow, barely noticeable. At first I thought the automatic table had shifted. But no, the patient's fingers were moving, curling, uncurling, like he was signaling someone, or something. I hit the intercom. "Sir, please stay still." He didn't respond. His fingers stopped moving. Then, gradually, his head turned toward the window. It wasn't quick, but the motion was too smooth, too controlled, like someone was guiding his muscles for him. When his face finally angled toward me, his eyes were open again, wide, unblinking, and he was smiling. A wide, unnatural, stretched smile that didn't match his earlier expression. I stepped away from the console, heart hammering. That's when the lights in the room dimmed. Only in that room. Everything else stayed bright. The monitors, the hallway, even the MRI wing lighting stayed normal. But inside the CT room, the overhead fluorescence faded like a slow sunset. I backed up until I hit the far wall. When the lights inside finally went completely out, leaving only the glow of the machine, the man on the table sat up. Not slowly, not stiffly. He bent forward in one quick, unnatural jerk, as if someone had yanked invisible strings attached to his spine. I stumbled toward the emergency switch, but before I hit it, the display screen in front of me changed again. A new image appeared, not static this time, a moving live feed, but not from the CT camera. It was from the hallway outside the radiology department, the long hallway, the one no one was supposed to be walking down at this hour, but someone was, a figure at the far end, not moving, just standing. The feed zoomed in on its own, as if the system was doing it intentionally. The figure was tall, wearing something like a torn hospital gown, bare feet, skin too pale. It was facing the door that led into radiology. I felt a cold wave spread through my body. I turned back toward the CT room. The man was off the table, standing, his silhouette barely visible in the low machine glow. Then he spoke, but not toward me, toward the darkness. "You found me." My hand hit the emergency stop, killing the power to the machine. The entire radiology wing went dark for half a second before the backup lights kicked on, but the CT room remained pitch black. I heard movement inside, soft, slow, close to the floor, like crawling. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, yanked open the door, and sprinted into the hallway. The moment I stepped out, a shiver ran down my spine. The hallway was empty, but the air felt wrong, charged, like static before a lightning strike. I hurried toward the elevator, swiping my badge repeatedly. When the doors slid open, the overhead speaker crackled. Not hospital announcements, this was different. A voice whispered, barely audible. "He's not the only one who followed you." Something moved at the end of the hallway. I didn't look back. I dove inside the elevator, hit the button for the main floor, and held my breath as the doors closed. When I reached the lobby, security guards were clustered near the entrance. One asked if I was all right. Before I could answer, the power flickered again, this time throughout the entire building. The doors to the radiology elevator opened on their own, even though no one had pressed the button. The hallway beyond was empty. No patient, no figure, no sound. The man from the CT room was never logged leaving. His paperwork from the ER vanished. The orderly who brought him in told staff the next day that he had no memory of transporting anyone matching that description. The security footage from the radiology hallway between 2:30 and 3 a.m. corrupted entirely. The hospital filed an incident report. They claimed equipment malfunction. They told me I was overtired. They gave me 2 weeks paid leave. I didn't go back. But sometimes, when I'm driving home late at night, I check my rearview mirror. And every so often, just for a second, I swear I see that hallway camera image again. Someone standing at the far end of a dark corridor, waiting.